condominiums can be more affordable than a single-family home and can many times be that first step to ownership, to creating wealth. So right now, in terms of multifamily housing, only 3% of the housing that is built are condominiums. The rest are apartments for rent.
Become rentals. They become
Exactly.
rentals, yeah. That's why we were seeing a lot of rentals. Can you explain to us what is the liability that causes?
So this is probably an entire show in itself, but there is a responsibility by the developer, the architect, and the contractor that the building is defect-free for 10 years. And that is a very broad term. And what happens is at year 9 or 9.5, an attorney may go to a condominium association. This is once the building's been up and operating for 9 years, and say to the association, do you have any defects or any problems?
So you can sue the developer.
Exactly. And what has become very confusing is the difference between a true defect that was either built incorrectly or designed incorrectly and maintenance, where things have fallen into disrepair due to the lack of maintenance.
Because it's 10 years, it's a long time.
That's correct. So there is maintenance that's required, and buildings can have problems if they aren't maintained over those 10 years. So that becomes very fuzzy and poses a tremendous amount of risk that does not motivate developers to build condominiums at this point.
So they just build rental units.
Correct.
And what are the other 4?
So another one is the adaptive reuse of commercial buildings to housing. So maybe a simpler word is just office to housing conversions. We have an excess of office supply over the last few years. In fact, the entire country has close to 1 billion square feet of excess office space, or will have an excess space. And so some of these buildings can be converted into housing and can be converted in a more costly approach, a more environmentally appropriate approach because you're using materials that are already in place, and can be more unique and can be wonderful places to live. I've personally done a number of them, and they actually are quite popular. But there are policies and codes that are problematic in many communities to continuing to allow that to happen. The third one has to do with commercial prevailing wage. When we work on affordable housing, the buildings are required to be built at a prevailing wage level, which is fine. But if a building wants to be built at 5 stories instead of 4 stories, commercial prevailing wage kicks in, and that adds another 30%, 25 to 30% more to construction. So a lot of our developers don't build that top floor.
That's why we don't see the more than 4-story buildings, right?
Particularly with affordable housing. As an architect or a developer going through this entire process of approvals that we talked about, and then seeing that we can't build to the true maximum because of that cost, is something we want to try to work out and see if there's another option. The California Residential Code that we'd like to see be used more often, not only for single-family homes, but for townhomes and row homes. It's an easier code to work within. We think there's some opportunities there that can help expedite the production of housing. And then finally is this idea of a building permit state appeals board. So if you think about, we have around 500 different cities within California, and if each of those cities has its own building department, and each of them are reviewing projects for code-related issues, the code book doesn't deal with every issue that comes up on an individual project, so there are these gray areas of interpretation. And when you have 500 different cities that many times have different interpretations of the code, it can be a very costly and frustrating process. And I think what we would like the state to consider is there is a state appeals board, but it's not being used properly or adequately right now. And if a developer could appeal or question a local decision that's made by a building official to the state level, and the state level makes a decision on that appeal that gets published, that can then become a tool or a framework for all these other cities to follow. And it's about just trying to bring more consistency into the process. The state fire marshal has that process now, and it's actually working quite well. And you can actually look online at some of the appeals that have been approved and they become, in a way, a softer way of how of adopting when a unique issue comes up, how it can be resolved, and it gives cover for the local agencies then to say, well, the state has approved this, I feel comfortable approving it as well.